Okay, well, I guess we better get going. Let's see, starting with a roll call.
Brenda, Melanie, Jennifer,
Oh, here. Sorry, was muted.
Ned,
Here.
Wesley,
Here.
Sean,
Here.
Ron,
Here.
Alexander,
Here.
and Mayor Rogers.
Okay, so I guess we've got some minutes.
Oh, give me 1 second, Ned. I think Brenda is actually in the attendee side. Let me promote her.
Good.
Let's see if
All right. Nice.
Brenda, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, awesome.
Sorry about that. I was having mechanical problems as usual. Okay, since you've already taken roll call, Zaira, let's take a look at the minutes.
And for the record, I just want to say Brenda and Melanie are both here now.
Great, thanks. Okay, I think we've got 3 sets of them to take a look at. Have you folks reviewed them already?
I did. I got a question on a follow-up on one of them, if it's okay to
Yeah,
ask.
please.
From the January 26th, when I brought up the issue of committee member timings going calendar year, which isn't ideal for the seasonal setup of our meetings. Has there been any further inquiry or follow-up on that from staff? Because that was like 5 weeks ago when we first brought that up.
Yeah, I think we're still determining if we can move the rate review committee up so that it would fit in line with our new turnover
Okay,
with calendar year, so that it doesn't go over the calendar year anymore.
okay,
Because we still want the rates to be approved before budget season. So I
Right.
think essentially we just have to kind of move it up
okay,
in order for that to work out.
okay. So in other words, meetings over the summer, essentially, I guess, to get everything in, right?
Yeah, that's probably what we're potentially looking at.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions with regard to the minutes?
So do we have to have one motion for each of the 3, or can we do one for all of them?
One for all of them.
Okay,
Okay.
can I call for a motion to approve the minutes, all 3 of them?
Well, okay, I'll set a motion going to approve 3 sets of minutes from our meeting. Do I have to specify the dates of them, or is that sufficient?
Preferably.
Okay, so the dates, I know one was January 26th, one was February 9th. I just don't have it on my screen. What was the earlier one? January something?
January 5th.
Okay, so I moved to approve the minutes of January 5th, January 26th, and February 9th, 2022.
Okay, any opposed?
We need a second.
I'm sorry
A
about that.
second.
A second, please?
I second.
Okay, anybody opposed to them? I guess.
And can we just get a vocal vote if everyone agrees, say it, aye.
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 Okay, it doesn't appear that there's any nays, so I guess the minutes are approved. Okay, so I guess we go on to committee business. So I'm sure we have some presenters.
Yeah, I just wanted to just talk really quickly about the flyer that was included in there. I think it's the first part of the committee business.
Mhm.
So those advertise the public notice, the public hearing that we have for the March 16th meeting. And all of those, there it is right there, went out with your water billing for today, actually. They went out. So if you receive electronic billing, you got it today. And if you get it by mail, it was mailed today. So everybody should get a notice on the public hearing that we have. And it was in English and Spanish.
Okay.
Okay. All right, received that. Thank you very much.
Ready for me to launch in?
Yep.
Okay. So let me share the screen. Go to here, share. Let's get this in a manner that you can see. All right. Are you seeing
Mhm.
just the one screen or just the one slide or two?
One.
One
Okay.
slide.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go system by system, and we will just kind of recap some of the key discussion items. We'll start with water. There is a one slide summary as requested by Ron. It's hard to fit everything on, boil it down to one slide, and you can let me know if you think that hit the mark, or if we need to work on that a little bit. But in any event, we'll walk through the capital improvements and funding sources, and then the rate, the findings in terms of overall rate increase, and then look at the rate schedules and bills. Starting with water and significant capital improvements, which is the case for really all the systems. Water's driven by the need to address regulatory requirements in the form of seismic and resiliency improvements, and also the increased density, accommodating increased density, which requires improvements to the distribution system. We've looked at two scenarios for the water capital improvement plan. This chart shows you the assumed new water treatment plant at about 12, I think it was about 12.5 million, and debt funding in blue, the blue bars, and the rest of the revenue. So this is the first time in a while that we've anticipated using additional borrowing. It's been many years that the city has been doing cash funding, but for a large project like this, it would be necessary to moderate the rate increases and spread the costs over the useful life of the facility. So it also is timed pretty well with the decrease in the existing debt. As we talked about throughout, there are SDC revenues coming in for water. The light blue bars, just the top of the bars here, are SDC revenue, but most of the SDC revenue is going to pay off a portion of existing debt that was used to fund reservoir and other improvements needed for growth. So it's not that SDCs aren't part of the plan. You're only seeing them a little bit in this chart because most of them go to retiring that existing debt. This chart shows you the two plans, surprisingly, and this is why this was put forward to look at a new water treatment plant, is that the incremental costs associated with the new plant option is only about 4 million more, actually about 3 million more, no, 4, sorry, my math in the head today, is because there's savings. There are other projects that the city wouldn't have to do if there's a new treatment plant, because it takes care of some of the upgrades at the plant that would be needed without the new plant. So that's why it seemed like a good idea to look at, and you can see that scenario, we do assume close to $10 million in debt to fund a good portion of that project. There is, and I don't know, Karin, Katie, when you want to talk about the new grant funds that the city has just found out that will be available, if you want to do that as part of this system or at the end. Is there a preference for that?
I can mention it now.
Okay.
So we, actually, the mayor submitted an application for ARPA funds to help pay for some of the water system projects that we're doing, specifically the water rates, or the water rights, purchase that we're making. And the budget committee did grant that, ARPA request. So that's $1.5 million, that would get added into the grant, total that you see of $450,000. And what we did though, was we kept this as is, in the sense that we really have two options as we move forward. Is we could lower the rate increase this time around when Deb gets to that. Or we can leave the rate increase the way it sits. And that means that we may be able to finance less. We may not have to do this $9.7 million worth of debt. Maybe we do $8 million worth of debt instead. So we asked Deb to keep it as is, but just know that as we move forward and as the committee needs to make a decision.
Great. Thanks, Karin. Okay, so moving along then, putting the capital together with the operation and maintenance costs, the other expenses and the existing debt, you can see the, just to reorient everybody, the orange bars are the capital transfers, looking at the water fund, and they get transferred out to fund capital projects in a different fund. And the red bar is at a 4% rate increase, the projected revenues. And you can see that in most years, those basically just meet the needed expenses. In some years, it's a little bit lower, and we dip down into reserves to cover the cost. And in a couple of years, it's a little bit higher. The revenue is a little bit higher. So you bring back up the gray and the black bars at the bottom. And so the reserves help to smooth the rate increases over the planning period. So again, this doesn't have that additional money in it. This 4% rate increase was designed to meet the projected capital and operation and maintenance and reserve targets, the dashed line. And it had only included this $450,000 grant that we knew about earlier in the process. So you can see on the capital side, which wasn't reflected in the bar graph, that the ending balance under the new water treatment plant scenario for capital specifically is about $2 million. So obviously, if you did this scenario and just with an additional 1.5 million coming in grant funding, that would bump up your remaining reserves to by another $1.5 million, so about $3.5 million for capital. That's if you assume the continued on with the 4% rate increase. But as Karin said, you could also use that money to offset a portion of the debt and or to reduce the rate increase. So we can talk about that more. In terms of the bill impacts of the 4%, I need to minimize this so I can see. There we go. You can see just by customer class, the bills for the typical users at monthly use for a residential customer is about 700 cubic feet. And you can see on the far right that the bill for a typical residential customer would increase from $2 to $240 per month each year as a result of those rate increases. The rate increases at a system-wide level are 4%, but we go through the cost of service process and also adjusting the fixed charge up slightly higher than, or more of that 4% is coming from an increase in the fixed charge than the volume charge. And so that tends to impact single family customers a little bit more. Any customer that has relatively small water use relative to their total bill.
Deb, can I ask a question on that?
Yep.
So you may have explained this in a little more detail 3 months ago when you first presented it, but the average is 4% and 4%. Is there a reason why all these varying numbers can't be simplified to 4% for all user groups to keep it simpler?
Well, that's a policy decision, sure. You know, the practice of the rate review committee has been to, every time we do an update, to also update the rates, not only to reflect the overall revenue needs, but the customer characteristics, the incremental adjustments to the fixed charge, which has been a long-standing kind of policy to bring the fixed revenue up to the industry standard,
Right.
around 35%. And it's actually, you know, in some cases 40%. And so just increasing that a little bit each time we adjust the rates. And so that's really why you're seeing these percentages differ across the customer classes as a result of those other forces at play. You know, the deviation is not great. It's, you know, you don't have anybody going up double digits or anything like that.
True.
But yeah, it does, from a customer understanding sort of, it would be more straightforward to have a 4%. And once you get that fixed charge up to 40% of your total revenue, then, you know, you could do that more easily without compromising some of the other policy objectives. You know, it's always a balancing act of, you know,
Sure.
public understanding, revenue adequacy, equity, and revenue stability. And the revenue stability piece is really important, particularly as we enter a period where you are looking at needing to issue significant debt. So I would encourage the committee to complete that phasing in of the fixed charge, those increases, but understand that it does make for some different kind of results across the classes and across individual customers.
Yeah, just to me, as an example, it seems a little unusual that just comparing residential, I mean, it's 4%, then it goes up to 4.5%. Multifamily is going up higher, but then goes down lower. And if you're trying to bring up the fixed charge as a greater percentage, which I understand, it's just unusual that things are moving in different directions from 23 to 24. You know?
So part of the issue is that in there are two things at play in these numbers. Well, three. There's one is the 4% overall. The
Right.
other is just what we call the cost of service of
Mhm.
realigning the rates to reflect the cost structure of the utility, i.e. how much is related to meeting average demands, how much is related to meeting peak demands, and then what are the customer profiles that allow us to allocate those costs in proportion to each customer class's demands. So the first year kind of realigns to cost of service and the fact that the peak demands drive a lot of that, and the fact that the peak demands tend to change, you know, when we look at a kind of a moving average of historical demand patterns. So that's what the first year reflects, as well as some increases in that fixed charge. And then the second year is pretty much about the fixed charge. So that's why that there's getting that that next increment up to meet the target of about 1%, 1 percentage point a year over to the fixed. And the smaller volume users, like the residential at 700 cubic feet, has a higher percentage increase.
Okay.
Could it be smoothed? Yes, with some tinkering, additional tinkering, it could be smoothed more, if that were the committee's desire. Any other questions on this? Not to forget that we have two types of water service. There is the non-potable water that is currently one customer, but is still an important part of the revenue generated to cover the costs. These rates are done based on a different methodology that reflects the capital costs of those facilities and a cost recovery component, and then the ongoing operation and maintenance costs. So the operation and maintenance costs have been updated for inflation, and the fixed charge has not changed. It's based on basically the debt service, which is a fixed cost. So these rates go up less in percentage terms than the other rates. So 2.5% to 3% per year. We did a significant update 2 years ago at the last rate review process, where the engineers actually went in and looked at the cost specifically to that system, the non-potable system, and there was a more significant cost realignment and a more significant rate increase for that customer last time. But this time it's just based on inflationary increase, pretty much. And we did, because it has been a few meetings, a few months since we talked about these things, just a reminder about how Newberg's rate increases have compared to some of the national trends. And it has been the case because of the fact that utility systems are so heavily, have so much capital requirements that, and there's been a lot of deferred maintenance over the years for generally in the industry, that rates have tended to increase more than, significantly more than inflation. And so you can see here, based on the 10-year period of 2010 to 2020, that water and sewer rate increases have been well over the in excess of what the city's rate increases for all of the systems really have been. Water has been about 4% for several years, and wastewater at 3.5%. So while the rates, it's not inexpensive to have wastewater service anywhere, your rate increases have been significantly less than the national average. So here's that one-page summary. The capital improvements that we're looking at in this planning period are driven by regulatory requirements and continued replacement needs. The higher density residential housing, HB 2001, is driving a lot. It is time. So the city has to make these improvements in a certain amount of time, as well as the seismic improvements. So that's driving a lot of the need, and that then drove the discussion about whether it was time to look at a plant replacement within this period. So a lot of capital needs, but the timing is pretty good with respect to the existing debt dropping off in 2026, and then again the larger debt in 2029. So this leaves capacity in the rate. We already have capacity in the rates to fund debt service, so you could take on new debt for the plant to spread the impact and still stay at a 4% per year system rate increase. And those bill increases, as we talked about, in the $2 to $2.50 range for a typical residential, depending on the usage level. And now the new bullet of city is has received some additional funds that have been earmarked for a water project, and therefore could use that to reduce the rate increase, and which we can to about 3.5%, would provide the, I've run the numbers, and to completely absorb that additional grant funding, the rate increase could go to 3%. However, as you enter a period of time of very high inflation that's really impacting capital improvements significantly, and you're going to take on significant debt, that a more moderate approach would be to reduce the rate increase to 3.5% initially, and then take another look in a couple of years. You could also stay at 4% and build up the reserve a little more. You're not, and then make a decision in a couple of years about how much to debt fund, and because while the debt service helps to spread out the cost over the period of time for which the facility is in service and keep the rates down in the short term, ultimately you're still taking on additional interest expense, and it is more expensive over the long term. So some things to think about. And I don't know how you want to do the meeting with respect, if you want to have discussion about this, or you want me to go through all 4 systems and then discuss at the end. Is that the preference?
Anybody have any ideas about that? Whether to discuss them individually or all together?
Well, if we can remember what we need to vote on later.
Yeah,
We can
I'd
always come
prefer
back
do-
to the summaries.
Yeah,
Right.
I'd prefer to do them individually, frankly, just for that very reason.
Okay.
Okay, this was, I was going to go on to sewer. So let's, if there's other questions on water or discussion, could stop.
Well, my 2 cents is, so we've got 3 options, the way I understand it, with this $1.5 million grant. And on one hand, I'm saying we could lower the bond so the debt isn't as much. But on the other hand, I think we should have the ratepayers be the beneficiaries of this and lower the increase from 4 to 3.5%. And at least that will be, if I remember, a decrease, or that it from what 4% that we've been having. So it'll look like the increase can go down a little bit. And I think that might be looked on more favorably. So that's my 2 cents.
Quick question. Do we know what year we're planning on taking out the loan to do the rest of the work?
Let me go back here. So the construction right now, Karen, is FY 25-26. Is still the best estimate of when that would need to be done?
Actually, it'll start in 24 and then continue on. So I think we assumed originally that we would have enough reserves to fund what we needed in 24, and then 25 and 26 is when we would start to need to do that debt. Obviously, as we move through the project and really sit down and get into the details about how that construction is really going to go, we'll have a better idea. But as Deb noted, somewhere between 24 and 26 is when we would need to take that debt on, just depending on how things fall out construction wise.
And just it depends in some respects on which kind of funding the city ultimately qualifies for and uses. If there are state loans, allow you to draw money for construction and then start paying off at the end once the project is done, which is a great thing. I mean, you that way you only pay interest, start paying interest on as you draw the funds, rather than having to borrow the whole $9 to $10 million up front, and then immediately paying interest on that full amount. So the agreement would be initiated somewhere in the 24 to 25 period, and the funds would likely begin being used in 25 and 26, and whether you would, hopefully could delay that starting to pay off the principal and interest on that until after the construction.
Okay, and we have no idea what interest rates would be like from now too, so I can disregard where I was going with my question from there.
Well, I've definitely bumped them up. Anytime we look out, in multiple years, particularly in the current situation where there's a lot of uncertainty, and we know that they're likely going to be rising in the next year or two. So yeah, borrowing has been relatively cheap for infrastructure. It's been in the 2%. It's been a while since the city had to issue any debt, at least for the utilities. So, but I think it's been 2.5%, something like that. Now I've run these numbers based on I think it was 4%, just to provide some cushion. Any other questions or
I have a
thoughts?
question about the rates.
Mhm.
If we were to go with the 4% that, or whatever that you guys are suggesting, what would actually be the difference between that and like, say we did 3%? I mean, would that, like, that's going to be pennies. It's not going to amount to a lot of money per individual customer. Is that correct?
I don't have those numbers ready. I can, when we get done with the presentation, I can toggle over to my spreadsheet and give you a better sense of that. If it's, it's not dollars, like you said. I mean, we're looking at $2 to $2.50 on a typical monthly bill at the 4%. And if that goes down to 3.5, it's gonna, I don't know if that's like 20 cents or a quarter, something like that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood it correctly.
Yeah, no, great questions.
Thanks.
So I just mechanically, how does this work when we have to make a decision? Like we've got 3 options. I mean, do we literally take a vote who favors option 1, 2, or 3? How does this work mechanically? Because we pretty much have to come up with a decision on these issues either tonight or the next meeting, because we're pretty much there, huh?
That would be correct. Yeah, you would, as a committee, you probably need to make a decision on, 1, what you want presented at the town hall, which would be the first step in that process. And then 2, yes, you're going to have to make a decision on what to recommend to the city council as a committee.
Right.
Do you do a 4%? Do you want to do a 3.5%, or what? And again, your first step is going to be, what do you want to present to the town hall? And then you'll have the piece of what do you present to the council?
Is there a deadline for questions to come up with information to present to the town hall?
Probably tonight, because we have to put together all of the documentation. We have to have it a week in advance.
Okay.
So Deb, can you run that calculation of the difference in the rate increase?
Mhm.
I work in mortgage, so I'm interest rates are part of my daily world. So I'm thinking of it in that, from that perspective. Like if we have a client who's looking at the difference between 4 and 3.5, for example, and the way that we'll put it to them is, it'll cost you this much money to take 3.5, and here's how long it would pay. It would in order to make up that difference, how many months or how many years. So can you, I'm looking at the screen and you have the rate increase of 4%, which averages out to, $2 to $2.50 a month. Can you do the same thing for, a lower interest rate for that loan? You know what I mean? So that when we're comparing those things, and as Ned said, that it does seem that if we present it, that we're passing that savings, if you want to call it that, onto the customer, that, it would show, I don't know, like there would be some extension of goodwill that, we're doing this for, for the citizens. But it would have to translate into something real. So if it is just a few pennies, on every bill, that may not be as appealing, or, may not have the support of everyone, versus, a buck or two would make a difference.
Sure.
Okay.
Let me see if I have that one open. I've got, 3 different versions of the model. But for some reason it's not letting me. I think I've got too many files open, so it's not. Why don't we come back to it at the end, and I'll clean up my screen and we can look at that, because I can show you those numbers tonight. I have them. I just need to be able to share the right screen for you. So shall we move on to sewer then, and then come back to water at the end? Does that work?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, for sewer, total capital improvement plan of about $31 million.
Deb,
There are,
You're not showing
What?
a full screen.
oh, I'm not? What are you
Nope.
seeing?
You're seeing the screen and then the next slide.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Why did that switch over? Let me,
Not sure what happened.
yeah, thanks for letting me know.
There we go.
How's that? Is that better?
Good.
That's better.
Okay, great. Okay, so this shows you both the annual amounts and the funding amounts for the capital improvements for sewer. You can see a lot of SDC funding for these improvements. In this case, the SDC money is basically being used to cash fund. It's not earmarked for existing debt service. And the total plan is about 31 million. And so it's just a little bit under what the water plan is. The financial plan with the operation and maintenance, the existing debt, there is significant existing debt service that the city that will continue to be paid off during this period and beyond. Shown here, this rate increase, consistent with the prior rate review process 2 years ago, as well as before that, is based on a 3.5% rate increase. And you can see the revenues, and then in the blue line, the projected ending fund balance, which is basically with the 3.5%, you would stay just above the minimum balance there. So those were the highlights on sewer. Again, you do have some, based on the cost of service analysis, you have some differences in percentage increases for different types of customers, but it's a little more consistent with the 3.5%, because we don't have the issue. You're already at about 35% revenue recovery from fixed charges for sewer, so we don't have the same issue of trying to increase the fixed portion relative to the volume portion. The only changes in the first year reflect that there's a lot of investment in more so in volume than in strength related costs. So the higher strength commercial classes go up slightly less initially, and then everybody goes up more consistently at the 3.5% the second year. You can see that even though this is a percentage increase is lower for a single family customer, this means $250 to $275 a month increase because the rates are higher. We're starting from a higher place. I shared with you some additional forecast information specifically for wastewater at one of our initial meetings, and you can see that those projected rate increases from some national survey data in the light blue, and those are more about 4%, and what we're projecting here is slightly below that at 3.5%. So again, consistent or a little bit better than what and this is larger cities and a smaller survey than the information I showed you before in that other survey. So like with water, everything pretty much the city has to plan for and do is driven by, in this case, permit requirements in terms of at the plant, and continuing to address infiltration and inflow issues. And there's also expansion, and that expansion is paid for by the systems development charges. So growth is funding its share. There is a little bit of debt service that drops off at the very end. No new debt planned, but the big debt that was related to the treatment plant goes beyond this planning period. So keeping the rate increase of about 3.5% is needed to balance, meet both the significant financial needs during the planning period and also keep the reserve level at just about the minimum. So we're not building large fund balances here because you are projected to need to use that revenue that's being generated. Any questions on sewer?
No.
Look like it.
Okay. Moving on to stormwater then. Much smaller capital improvement plan, but also a much smaller rate base to fund it currently. Total is about 7 million. Number of different projects that staff had presented in detail, and can answer any questions about those specific projects. SDC revenue is a funding source, part of the funding sources, and it's all cash funding that we are anticipating. The main issue with storm, the challenge here is that the current rates don't really fund capital that we've talked about, that this is the newest, well, actually TUF is the newest utility fee, but this is a pretty recent utility system that was formed, and these rate increases have been incremental to first prioritize funding the operating costs, and then in more recent years has provided some amount of capital funding, but it's insufficient to meet the projected needs. And that's been the case. I mean, that's why the percentage rate increases have been significantly higher for stormwater. So specifically, the current rates can support about 300,000 in capital, but that erodes as inflation. Like anybody, the utility is impacted by rising costs, and so it's projected that as those operating costs continue to increase, then you need to have additional rate increases beyond inflation to build to funding the capital needs, which average 800,000 per year over the planning period. So, but the good news is, like with water and the opportunity to reduce the rate increase from what it had been previously forecast. So 9% has been the percentage increase for the last multiple rate cycles. And that was forecast in the last plan for the next 5 years. We ran 2 options for stormwater. One is 6.75% increases, which is really the minimum to, as you can see, build those orange bars. We need those to grow to meet the capital improvement plan needs, and also the rising operation and maintenance costs. A 7.5%, but the problem with that is you can see the reserve level down here, the black bar is below the dash bar. So that would meet some of the requirements, but not provide a reserve that meets that minimum target. The 7.5% is projected to do that over time to get there, but you're starting from below the minimum and a need to, facing significant capital improvements. So it's assumed that even, with these significant increases, they're going to first go to fund the projects and not basically be able to build reserves. So, but the good news is both systems lower than the projected increases 2 years ago. You can see the bill impacts here, even with the fact that these are the percentage increase is significantly more. The last 9% rate increase that just went into effect in January increased the rate $1.20 per month. So taking that down to 6.75 or 7.5 would actually reduce that increase. Looking at between $1 and $1.20 over the next 2 years, depending on which option. So the committee will have a choice here as well. Significant capital improvements for regulatory capacity and expansion needs. The current rates are not sufficient to fund the current capital. Initial rate increases have focused on that operation and maintenance component and just beginning to fund some capital. But even with that situation, where the forecast does allow us to back off slightly on the percentage rate increase from prior projections, and the bill increases are a third to half of what those increases for water and wastewater are. The stormwater bills, and I included all those bill comparisons, so you had that all handy. But those are in the middle of the range of other communities. Discussion questions here?
So this is voting issue number 2, as I see it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Do you want to just do those votes both at the end and just move on to the transportation, which is the last one?
Anybody have any problem with that?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so TUF is a transportation utility fee. That is the simplest in that it is going, a revenue stream that is going to fund a type of capital improvement, and it's just dedicated to that. So we don't have to look at operation and maintenance costs separate from capital costs and all those other things. And so the city plans projects based on the funding level of those TUF improvements. The estimated support maintenance needs are about 1.5 million per year, and the other capital that's related to the streets is funded through other means, primarily gas taxes, SDCs, and grants. The issue here is that there luckily some the expenses in 2021 were significantly less than planned during the pandemic and probably other factors. So there was, the green line shows that there was a building up of the reserve, And but we talked about at the last meeting that the rates, the tough rates have increased. Well, there was no increase for a couple of years, then there was a 2% increase. So they haven't kept pace with inflation at all. And so to get it back to a level that is funding the original target was 1.2 million. And so to get that back to a level that would actually, fund the needed improvements to maintain the level of service that was planned, really need to increase that annual rate increase. And what we've run here is 4%, which would bring the purple dash line, which is the rate revenue, the projected tough revenue, and using that in combination with the reserves to fund the improvements over the planning period. But that would, again, use up that reserve that was created because some projects were deferred. The tough has generally not carried a significant reserve balance. It's kind of spend as you go, as you earn, and which is easier to do when you're talking about pavement maintenance. But the 4% is what is estimated to be the minimum needed to get that system have the necessary funds to do the improvements. So for that, you can see, and this just shows the comparison of the inflationary, the proposed rate increase. Last one was 2%, a 4%. You'd go from close to 520 to 540, so it's about a 20-cent per month increase. And this just shows the bottom line is just compares that to the inflationary rate. So it's still significantly below where it would have been had it been tied to inflation. Implemented in 2017, no rate increases the first 2 years. Actual revenue has been below the 1.2 million projected. And the big issue is just keeping up with inflation. And so this, the recommended increase is 4% up from 2%, which is obviously the smallest dollar impact as well. And the tough, these rates, you're on the lower end of the other communities that charge these type of fees. So, and then the combined bill altogether, and this does include the 4% for water, and as well as 3.5 for sewer. I've used the 7.5 for storm here, the 4% for tough. These last two fees aren't part of the rate review process, but they're there because they show up on the bill so that you can see the combined impact, which is for this typical customer, $6.30 to $6.65 overall, or about 4%. And then I just included information on the rate comparisons. You had those in your packets. I don't know to what extent you want to see those again. You have one for each individual system, and then the combined, which we looked at the last meeting, which does show you to be the highest of these communities that have been part of this ongoing comparison. And we talked about how that's driven by the sewer rates, which are in the green, because the other rates, you're not the highest. And in fact, in some cases, you're middle to lower. Just as a, we are required to have, I think you publish the rate schedules. So I had included these rate schedules in here based on those, increases, and Storm has both the 6.75 and the 7.5. So I guess, you've got the decisions, what would be good to know is the committee's leaning on the what to do about the water, and then which increase for storm, and then to affirm or not the sewer and the tough increases. And if there's any additional information that you need, I can stop share and find my I can, while you talk about stormwater, I can pull up the water chart that would show you the impacts of the 3.5%. So I'll do that.
Deb, while you're doing that, can we go back to slide 26, which shows all the percentages for each item on the water bill? All the percent increases,
Oh, okay.
if you don't mind.
I
Is
mean,
that
I can do
possible
that.
to
I won't
show
be able
that
to,
one?
I won't be able to look for the other,
Oh,
thing.
okay.
but that's okay because you wanted to see that. That's an
Well,
important part of.
here's what I was thinking. It would be nice to simplify all this for the public, okay? And like the percentages are all different for, if we go back to 26.
Oops. 26, okay. Here. Oh,
Oops, sorry.
that one?
That one, right there. Okay. So we've got 4%, 3.5, 7.5, 4%. Okay. What I'm thinking is to simplify our presentation to the public. If maybe we could agree that $1.5 million grant can go towards reducing the top line increase from 4 to 3.5%, then that lines up with the sewer increase. Okay, 3.5 and 3.5. I'd kind of like to also see the tough go just up to 3.5 for consistency. I think people would understand that better and it'd be less, well, why is one going up a little more and then the others? Okay, so my 2 cents is, okay, storm's got to go up, and at least if we present that that's gone down from 9%, and if the other 3 can be stabilized or whatever at 3.5%, I think it's a simpler presentation to the public as far as all the major ones are going up the same amount. And that's my 2 cents.
Okay, you all keep talking. I'm gonna
Okay.
I'm gonna switch over and try to find my other file here so I can share with you, just so you can see exactly what those impacts would be reduced to.
Well, I'm gonna jump in here and say I do like the idea of doing 3.5% for the water, but I also can't help but thinking about how an $8.5 million loan is gonna be way less interest 3 years from now than a $10 million loan. So I feel like we're just kind of pushing the dollar down for just to pay later, when we could just increase it to 4% and maybe invest that 4% and get interest from what's in the savings account, basically.
So you're saying add it to the reserves? Is that what you're essentially
Yeah.
saying? Okay.
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for, reserve. And hopefully the reserves are getting some sort of interest on them, whether it's like 0.5% or something.
Yeah, I think that the 3.5 and the 4%, to me, it's not a lot of difference in what a person's monthly bill would be. And I think the numbers are going to reflect that. So I just think that if the numbers that were presented, they look correct to me, I think that we should go, my vote would be for the 4 and then the 7.5 and then the 9. Just because it doesn't make a lot of sense, like Jennifer was saying, to kick the can down the road when we don't really need to. And with inflation being what it is, and we don't know how that's going to go, I would looking ahead, I would think that it would make more sense to go with the little bit higher rates, just so we can have a little bit more of a reserve if we need it as well.
Just my 2 cents. I think that so long as you feel that that's been adequately proven as a good rate increase, 4%, that's fine. But you have to consider, what's come up before you. And if you have any questions about it, tonight would be the time to ask those. Since we got to present it for a public meeting next time. But if everybody,
Can you see my tables?
yes.
Okay, sorry, there's a lot of numbers here. But so the numbers on the left are this is based on the 4%. So as we were talking about this is the typical average residential, and those increases $2.07, $2.38 for 700 cubic feet. If it's 3.5%, those are reduced to $1.81 and $2.08. So it's 25. It's about 25 cents. Is that something like that?
Deb, I got to say that's pretty close to your guesstimate, I think.
I know, right?
Good job.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, 26 cents in that case. So, yeah. While I have these open, is there any other numbers you want to see? Oh, and I guess here's the percentage increases. So that 3.5% overall, and then you can see how it's distributed across the different classes and the years. And this would help achieve, sorry for all the numbers here, going 33, 34%, getting very close to the increase to the fixed charge, that 35% that we were talking about. All right, I'll stop share so that in case you want to look back at the presentation at all. And I don't think, so I think back to what either Katie or Karin were saying about the next meeting is a town hall. So we can present, one option or multiple options. You can present the 4%, and then if you then reconsider after public input, then you still have another meeting after that, right? No? Isn't there one other meeting for oh, there's not a kind of a regroup after that. Never mind. Okay, I guess you're kind of on the hook for coming up with your recommendation.
If I could, and sorry, my internet's unstable, but just a notion on the public hearing, and I think Deb and probably Karin can confirm this, and I don't want to jinx y'all, but historically, that's not been a huge turnout. In fact, I think in recent years, if we had one person, that would be quite amazing. Now, again, I don't want to jinx you because all of a sudden the room will be full. But anyway, that's just one thing to think. And the other thing is that I think, at least from the council's perspective, and probably most people, as long as we're below what's projected for inflation, I think most people understand it, or at least, again, that's been the past occurrence. So anyway, so thanks.
Anybody have any other questions? Does anybody have a request for any further information to prepare for the public meeting?
Well, do we have to then decide what we agree on for how to use that 1.5 million grant, and whether to go with the 6.75 or 7.5 on the stormwater? Do we have to have all those determined tonight, which way we're going to proceed? So I guess my question is, when the public hearing comes around, should we be having one pathway for all of these components? Should we have it all decided on tonight?
Unless anybody has any other information that they need for to be presented before then. Because I guess tonight's the last time we can ask for further information, but if nobody has a need for any further, I guess we can maybe decide on it preliminarily at least before presentation. Anybody have any ideas, any discussion?
Well, I guess we can start. Are we thinking the 4% for the water or the 3.5? I could go either way.
Do you want to, I don't know, take a preliminary vote, see what people think about it? I mean, who's thinking 3.5 at this point?
I am.
Yo tambien, baby. Anybody else? Have any other ideas? Are you folks thinking 4%? I mean, the rest of you have not spoken.
I don't want to say I need more information, but I do want to hear, like, I guess, you know, when you're weighing these two things, what are we really looking at, right? Like what difference are we really looking at? Are we looking at having more money in reserves and that's going to benefit everyone? Or is it, you know, a little bit of savings to the customer?
Mhm.
I mean, is it really just that simple? And, you know, and if that's the case, then I think that having more money in reserves makes more sense.
Sometimes, I think you're right. Sometimes you have a little bit too much in reserves that you
Mhm.
don't need necessarily, and it just drives the price up. And you have to figure that, you know, you have to look at your consumer base. And there's a lot of people with fixed incomes and, you know, and other issues that they have to look at. And I mean, you know, 3.5 versus 4% may not seem to be a lot, but to some people that's a ton when you look at their, you know, their whole composite that they have to deal with. So.
Yeah, I mean, knowing that we're not going to have a big turnout, right? That a lot of people are not going to want to participate in this, which is shocking because it's the most fascinating stuff ever. That if we are saying, you know, 3.5 versus 5, 3.5, or at 4, sorry, not 5, 4. Sorry, because interest rates are really that high right now. That if we're going to hold this money in reserve, how do we present that as being beneficial to everyone, right? Like, we're going to keep this money and not necessarily earmark it for anything specific. You know, as a customer, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If that's savings that could be passed on, then why aren't we doing that?
Mhm.
You know, what is that money really being held for? What can it be used for? And if there are, you know, viable things that we could present that this is what, you know, this money could be used for these things that would benefit everyone, that would probably go over a little better.
Mhm.
And let me jump in if I could. So, yeah, so it would be used for water projects, and specifically in my head, it would be used to draw down the amount that we have to finance for the new water treatment plant that we're going to have to build. So in my head, assuming when we get to that point, is rather than the 9.75 million we have to issue debt for, we only have to issue debt for 8.25 million. And that would be what the difference would be. And that's what the money would be used for.
I think as a consumer, that would be very appealing, right? To me, like that's one, I would want to hear what that money is being used for. And if it's being used for something that makes that much sense, then it's kind of a no-brainer that 4 should be what it is.
Right. Do we have that information already, Karen? I mean, about what, like, if you look at the 3.5 proposed rate increase versus 4% rate increase, how that's going to affect the debt funding as opposed to just keeping it in reserves?
Yeah, it's well, basically, if with the 4%, you would generate, you could use the 1.5 million. At 3.5%, you would have about, what I did was I reduced the debt to 9 million from the 9.75, because that you would have additional reserves of about 800,000 or so. So if you use that, basically said, well, we're just going to issue less debt and put that money towards the treatment plant, then the debt service, I can tell you in a minute what kind of a difference that makes in the additional debt service. So I calculated based on the 9.75 million debt issuance that the annual debt service would be 728,000. That's based on that 4% interest rate, and it would be 670,000 roughly if we took the additional revenue from the rate or from the grant and applied that both to a reduction in the rate sum and then a reduction to the treatment plant borrowing. So it saves about 50,000, 50 to 60,000 a year in debt service.
Now that's assuming a 3.5% rate increase.
Correct.
So not the 4%.
Correct.
So what would be the difference if we kept it at 4% and the difference in the debt?
Well, so then you would be reducing the revenue bond from 9.75 to 8.5, or let's see. So let's
I'm
run
making
those numbers.
work her math magic.
This is I guess this is the benefit of Zoom, right? That we can.
Oh, Deb, you don't need a spreadsheet. You can just do it. Just to
I do in my head.
Oh, no.
So
We don't need to see your work. Just give us a number.
Right. You'd issue debt at 8.25 million, and that debt would be about 615,000 a year if we're assuming the 4% interest rate, and so that's compared to the 7. That's almost 100,000. It's actually a little more than 100,000 a year. So less debt and higher rate increase initially, but again, significantly less expense over the years.
And if the public has questions, I mean, the reserve would be going towards the new facility.
Yes. So you basically, yes, you would just take the money that the grant is funding a portion of the improvements. And so you would just, rather than borrowing that same amount, you would apply it to cash fund the projects.
Are you ready to vote?
Does anybody have any other questions? And are we ready to vote?
I'm ready if everybody else
Yep.
is.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Right, let's take a vote then. All in favor of the 4% rate increase, say aye.
Aye.
Wait, Brenda, you have to make a motion, then someone seconds it, and then.
All right.
Sorry about that. Okay, sorry. All right. Anybody want to make a motion to take a vote on the 4% versus a 3.5% rate increase?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, any second?
I'll second.
Great. All right, all in favor of the 4% rate increase, say aye.
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 Okay, all opposed? Aye.
Aye or nay, however.
Okay, so looks like 4-2.
Agree.
All right,
Well, Ron also voted for the 3.5%.
3.5, okay, 3. All right. So looks like it's 4-3, so it looks like the 4% carries. Am I counting that correctly, Zara?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so it looks like at this point, we are insofar as presenting things to the public, advocating a 4% rate increase. Is that correct? Sounds like, does anybody have any other questions for presentation to the public?
It was actually 5-3, 5 yeses.
The 3, okay.
Only 3 voted no, Ned, Brenda, and Ron, correct?
Okay, so it's 5. Sorry about that. Okay, so 5-3. So it's like that carries the day. Right. Is there any public commentary tonight, Sarah?
No public comment tonight.
We have one other thing to decide on. I think it's stormwater rates. We were presented with either 6.75 or a 7.5% increase. And Deb gave us numbers for both options, so we should probably settle that one too.
Definitely. Okay, anybody want to make a motion to decide that issue? With stormwater?
I make a motion that we have an increase of the 7.5% for stormwater increase.
Right, and a second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed? Aye.
Okay.
Okay. Zara, I can't tell who voted for what at this point. Can you?
So
give the-
no, it's just Brenda and Wesley, correct?
Correct.
Correct, okay. All right, so there's 2 as opposed to what, 6?
6 yeses, 2 no.
All right. Okay,
So I just have a mechanical question. What are we going to physically show the public, the 1 to 4 people that might show up next time?
well, I think we show them the justification of what we just voted on, but anybody else?
What we've tended to do is to, recognize they're walking in cold, and so we have in the past provided them with some information on the capital improvements, just so people understand what the utilities are facing, because that's driving a lot of the rate increase. And not to get into the detailed, schedules like we've done with you all, but to stay at a higher level than about the rate impacts that would be associated with these increases.
And can I make a recommendation of one other thing to include? And maybe you're already thinking about this, but the percentage increases that we've just agreed on from your recommendations are mostly lower than what it's been. And that the public's going to want to see that.
Absolutely.
So we can somehow at least have present and maybe going back 1 or 2 years for the water, for the sewer, okay? And then what the projected increases are, showing that the increases are smaller, that would help give us credibility that we're trying to work in their best interest to keep these increases under control. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. great suggestion.
Or less than the national.
That's true too. Yeah.
Mhm.
The only other thing I wanted to remind the committee is that after the town hall at the public hearing, you as a committee have the ability to make the same recommendation to council for rate increases or something different depending on what you hear that night. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is not your final recommendation to council. You have one more. Basically, we'll close that public hearing and then the committee will deliberate to provide a recommendation to the city council. So
Good to
just
know.
kind of keep that in mind also.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
And-
Just one
Will
other
that
thing.
happen
if I
right
could
after the
share.
public meeting? Okay.
The only other thing in this, I know this has happened at least once or twice in the past, is that city council has actually taken the recommendation and somehow changed it. So the council still has that right. It's very rare, but it could happen. So again, if there are complaints, if people have that and you want, do direct it to us, direct it to staff, to city council, and we can address it from there. So thank you.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, anybody else?
Katie or Karen, don't they have to vote on the other two rates since they're gonna be proposed at the meeting as well, even though there's no changes?
I don't know if they have to vote or if it's just based on,
Like-
unless there's something different that somebody wants to propose other than what we've already shown. I don't
Okay.
know the vote per se on that. They will have to, at the next meeting, they will have
Okay.
to make a determination that, yes, we're going to propose a 3.5% increase on the sewer rates or whatever that is. But I don't know that they'd need to tonight.
Thank you for the clarification.
If I could just again, thank you all. So, Brenda, and Jennifer, Sean, Wesley, Ron, Alexander, Ned, thank you all so much. I know this is incredibly sort of detailed. And even though people may not show up, we know how important it is. So thank you very much. This is one of the most important functions of the city. So thank you very much.
Okay,
Well, thank you for coming tonight. That was good.
that was good.
Yep.
All
A
right.
good surprise, right?
Yeah.
Hey, anytime, just let me know. Thank you.
Okay, any further business? Right. Okay, motion to adjourn? Want to do that, or did I just get to adjourn the motion?
You get to adjourn it, yeah.
All right, you guys, I'm sorry. One of these days I'll get this. Okay, I guess the meeting's adjourned unless anybody has anything else. All right, thanks a lot, you folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good night.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
2 weeks.
Yes. We'll be there.